I'm Awe Srinivasan. I'm going to continue with my touch to speech voice now. Otherwise, we may be here all day listening to it my delightful voice. LOL.
I'm going to be discussing the neurodynamics of multisensory integration in autistics today, specifically this paper on audio-visual integration in autistics. First, what is multisensory processing? It's how sensory signals from different modalities are organized in our perceptual experience. It is important to balance temporal segregation and integration as it impacts how these different modalities get organized in our perceptual experience. Sometimes, though, the stimuli and conscious perception of that stimuli by the mind don't quite align. So the mind uses educated guesses or probabilistic inference, which leads us to idea of illusions. Let's look at an illustration of a stream bounce illusion. What you saw was visual input, where two balls seem to stream past each other. What happens when we add auditory input? When you add in the audio, the two balls seem to bounce off each other. What we imagine hearing will change what we see. So what is the relevance to autism? Temporal binding window thought to be wider in autism. This is the amount of time within which the different stimuli are integrated and perceptually bound together. A shorter window would help motor coordination in case of dyspraxia, and it would help autistics better navigate their sensory environment. Autistics are found to be less susceptible to audio-visual illusions. Let us watch the McGurk effect illusion.
Have a look at this. What do you hear?
Ba, ba, ba.
But look what happens when we change the picture.
Ba, 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 ba.
And yet, the sound hasn't changed. In every clip, you are only ever hearing ba with a B. Concentrate first on the right of the screen. Now to the left of the screen.
In the illusion, what we see overrides what we hear.
I informally polled a neurotypical friend to compare my experience to his. His experience matched that of video. I'm autistic. When I watched the video, I heard only one sound. When my attention was redirected to looking at the different lips, I realized that it could be interpreted as different sounds, though I still only heard one sound. Audio-visual integration is seen as playing crucial roles in social functioning and communication in autistics. While my experience will not match that of all autistics, I think I can best explain the complexity of multisensory issues in autism by drawing on my own live experience. I have oral motor apraxia, which affects speech and body motor planning and coordination. When I walk, I can't pace myself. It's like I have to sprint from start to finish, almost like my body feels it cannot complete the task otherwise. I have sensory dysregulation, like gating environmental stimuli, making me sensitive to even things like barometric pressure differences. My body feels like it's on a state of high alert all the time, and overwhelmed with sensory bombardment. For instance, when I walk into a crowded room, I'm hearing all the conversations rather than ones relevant to me. Maybe the sensory issues underlie the inattentiveness part of my ADHD. It's hard to focus externally with so much going on. I also have synesthesia, which is experiencing one sense through another. For example, I feel the abrasive texture of a canvas tent than just seeing its color. I also have poor body mapping issues in that I don't have a good sense of where my body is in space and time. The best analogy I can draw to this is that my body can feel like driving a car with a loose steering wheel. I attempt to turn the wheel one way, but I'm never sure which way the car will really go. As a result, I tend to rely on vision and movement to keep a lot of my body parts feel connected to each other. Movement means my body parts are talking to each other. And when I close my eyes, it feels like I have lost track of the rest of my body, which is quite a scary feeling. And I can panic in darkness as I don't have that visual input to get a sense of where I am in space and time. There's more, but moving on in interests of time. This brings us to the discussion of the current study, which starts with this basic assumption that multisensory integration segregation balance is crucial for high-level social functions like speech in autism. The study investigated mechanisms behind altered multisensory processing in autism using an oscillatory framework. Hypotheses for the Ronconi study were around the altered neural signatures in autistics. Specifically, a weaker link between algorithms and audio-video integration window, as this indicates a poor reliance on endogenous oscillatory activity and are more stimulus-driven multisensory processing. Absence of pre-stimulus power phase differences between integration and segregation, which would suggest marginal reliance on anticipatory signals. A different impact of auditory-induced phase reset. This would suggest atypical balancing and temporal alignment of the different unisensory signals. The autistic sample was matched with typical controls, matched for age, etc. On this slide, I do want to highlight one thing which I will reference later. It's the screening out from the autism group of behavioral issues, drug therapy and co-occurring conditions like ADHD. A proxy for multisensory was an audiovisual task, namely the stream bounce illusion. There were 3 trial conditions. In the pre-coincidence condition, the sound stimulus was given before the 2 dots overlapped. In the synchronous condition, the sound was around the time of the 2 dots overlapping. In the post-coincidence condition, the sound was after the 2 dots had overlapped. Participants had to say if it was stream or bounce. A sound-dependent change in visual motion was the key to testing audio-video integration versus segregation. A stream meant segregation. A bounce meant integration. Since this was an audio-visual task, the focus was on EEG electrodes in the occipital and temporal clusters. I will be discussing results from the study next. I will briefly touch on the behavioral results first. In the EEG findings in general, the TD children reflected earlier findings in TD adults. Differences were seen in the autistic spectrum group. I will discuss just 3 highlights that line up with the 3 hypotheses. In terms of behavioral performance, there was no statistical group difference, only condition difference. The bar graph shows illusory rate or the rate of bounce trials perceived over total number of trials. Perception for both groups was towards bounce for the first 2 conditions, which is the sound before and during dots overlapping. Perception was towards stream in the last condition, which is sound after the dots overlap. The next result is around algorithms and cross-modal binding window. Algorithms occur during the awake relaxed state, being in the now. They are inhibitory and gate out irrelevant sensory stimuli. In the typical population, resting state alpha is proposed as a key mechanism for temporal sampling within and across modalities. A lower alpha peak frequency means more integration and higher illusory rate, indexing a temporal widening of the audio-video binding window. The TD group reflected the result of negative correlation between IF and illusory rate. The autistic group showed a lack of correlation. Suggests a noisier cortical alpha sampling. Another highlight is around theta waveforms. In TD, theta oscillations are thought to predict upcoming auditory stimulus based on visual dynamic information. The TD group in the study reflected results of TD adults in other studies. The theta oscillations clustered around a common phase angle for bounce integration versus the stream trials. It shows anticipatory activity predicting integration. In the autistic group, there was an absence of this different phase concentration in occipital or temporal clusters. Suggests autistics do not rely on anticipatory mechanisms that typically track dynamic visual events. Another highlight is around auditory-induced phase reset. In TD, auditory stimuli can reset the phase of oscillatory activity in visual cortex, thought to help align rhythmic brain activity of auditory and visual areas and thus open a temporal window where audio-visual integration can occur. In autistics, however, auditory-induced phase reset caused segregation of audio-visual stimuli, breaking the integration and illusory outcome. The highest phase concentration was strictly dependent on auditory event timing. There was a stronger occipital phase reset of oscillations in the alpha band in segregation compared to integration groups. It suggests a stronger reactivity to auditory inputs. Summing it all up, audio-visual integration segregation is present but different in autism. Distinct computations supporting multisensory processing weighed differently. Marginal reliance on anticipatory signals of audio-visual co-occurrences counterbalanced by greater impact of post-stimulus neural dynamics. Integration was not predicted by speed of alpha rhythms or by amplitude. Instead, a different neural processing of the sound and a differential post-stimulus sound-induced realignment of visual cortical oscillations could explain integration versus segregation. These results show how multisensory integration depends on different endogenous, anticipatory, and stimulus-driven factors, which seem selectively altered in autism. I wanted to see how these results align with observations of my lived experience as an autistic. I don't claim to represent all autistic experiences, of course. The first result does seem to align with my experience. My body does get overwhelmed with sensory stimuli and alpha rhythms do serve to gate sensory stimuli. I'm ambivalent on the second result. My body feels like it's on high alert and in constant anticipatory mode. I have a harder time being in the now, racing thoughts about what's next, all of which seems to indicate anticipatory. Perhaps missing critical anticipatory stimuli in the now is due to ADHD co-occurrence. The 2021 Stanford study found that the altered audio-visual interactions could be due to a shared phenotypes in autism and ADHD. Many of us autistics are in an enormous amount of therapy, which will continue lifelong. For instance, in behavioral therapy, a therapist will show you a visual, followed by an auditory instruction. It is possible that it's taking us longer to respond, maybe due to inattention or other communication motor issues. But unless you have responded almost immediately, the therapist may think you have not understood and will keep repeating the instruction every few seconds, all the while demanding that you maintain eye contact or display body language that says you are paying attention. So there are competing energy resource needs towards maintaining a paying attention body versus integrating the relevant audio and visual and motor of the actual task involved. That is to say, there is an auditory-induced phase reset every time, causing segregation rather than integration. I have to wonder if some of these findings are due to learned behavior. For me, the major limitation and future direction in any autism study is the heterogeneity of autism. The current diagnostic criteria based on external behavioral observations means you have this big catch-all bucket called autism. Research, however, studies a small segment of the testable autistics, which means research findings are more meaningful to this narrow band. Yet professionals and educators use these research results as a blanket truth that must apply to all autistics. We need to break autism down at a physiological level so that research results are applied appropriately. The second issue is that most autism studies strip away the presence of co-occurring conditions, behavioral issues, drug therapy, etc., all of which are ubiquitous in autism, all of which could alter sensory experience. The head of autism pediatrics at John Muir Hospital in San Francisco once remarked that almost a quarter autistics will get seizures during puberty. Educators almost encourage and seem comforted with medication as it will take care of behavioral issues, not thinking about long-term impacts of such memory loss, liver function, decreased height during puberty, increased movement issues, etc. Dr. Antonio Hardin from Stanford Autism Clinic once remarked at a conference that psychotropics don't seem to work the same way in the autism population compared to the general population. Yet this is an over-medicated population. We need to be looking at these interactions in future studies. Most autism studies seem to have looked at just audio and visual. I found one on audio and somatosensory, which showed lower integration in autism, and another on olfactory and visual which showed no group differences. How can we test 3 or more modalities? Can we do this in animal models? As you can see from my sensory experience, there is a lot of senses involved. The skin, for one, is the largest sensory organ in the body. EEG is just one measure. We need to investigate with many measure same samples. Also, this study seems to imply a dominance of auditory, though my personal experience has been that visual is dominant. Of course, my case will not represent all autistics on the spectrum. Thank you Thilo and Leah for giving me confidence and assistance with this presentation. Thank you everyone for your patience as I navigate this atypical mode of presenting. I will attempt any short questions. I may have to email you longer responses. Also, I am curious about your audio-visual integration with the computer-generated audio voice, which lacks intonation of human speech. For instance, did you need more words or less words on screen for integration?
What about if I used this computer voice?
Discussion questions. First is addressing heterogeneity in autism and going from behavioral diagnosis to physiological. From a social perspective, larger group means more advocacy power. But I feel research solutions apply to the testable few. Then it's how to design a sensory study that really looks at 3 or more modalities. Third is around more humane language to present scientific results about fellow human beings. As an autistic, there is a toll on mental health to be referred to as peculiar, anomaly, disorder, deficit. The current diagnostic ratio of 1 to 44 means autism is no longer an anomaly. Minor word changes can make a huge difference towards humanity that all of us expect from the world around us. We march with both science and humanity. Thank you.